Welcome to the Model UN seminar. These are the flipped activities for week 6. Our research question is, why are developing countries still poor? And the answer to that question is international aid. But this is just one possible answer, one of the reasons that explain why developing countries are still poor. I focus on international aid because personally, I have a more efficient way of helping others. And I promise I will explain why I have quotation marks around helping when we get to that topic. So what I'm trying to do here is to give you the background that you might understand better why my way, and again this is not just my way in this case, it's a way that has been widely adopted and proved, so why my way is more efficient. In addition, I believe that international aid is a whole system, and this system is unhealthy and it has negative impact at several levels. So if we could break it by changing it, we might actually make fast and radical changes possible. So that's why I'm focusing on it, because I see a lot of potential for changes if we can break that system. Last week we focused on 1960s international aid, and we saw that it was mainly concerned with improving large-scale infrastructure like roads, electricity, railroads. And we will see that in the 1970s there is a change of focus. It's not going to be infrastructures anymore, it's going to be poverty. Why poverty? Well, it's history that can explain, or partially explain, why they changed the focus of international aid. On October 17th, 1973, OPEC, which stands for Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, so petroleum means oil, right? The thing that you can, after some changes, put in your car so that you can drive. Things, we can also use it to make plastic, for instance. So OPEC put a 6-month embargo on oil. It actually ended in March 1974, so it might be like 5 months and a half or something like that. So it means that for about 6 months, no oil was sold to first the US and then 3 other countries, the Netherlands, Portugal, and South Africa. To help you better understand the background of the 1970s aid, but also to help you understand what's happening nowadays with oil production, I made this map of the OPEC members. So please note, it's 1973. So as you can see, you've got a lot in the Middle East, and then 3 countries in Africa, and then 2 countries in South America, and yes, Indonesia. In terms of membership though, I want you to know that since 2009, Indonesia has suspended its membership. So it didn't leave OPEC, but has suspended it. And also another African country, Gabon, joined in 1975, but then left in 1995. And one that joined and stayed is also Angola, so another African country. And also, to go back to the 1973 oil crisis, as it's often called, I wanted to point out that only some countries belonging to the organization stopped selling oil to the US. According to NPR, and you have the reference at the end of the video, actually, Iran was quite friendly to the US and kept selling oil to the US. So there wasn't a complete agreement within the organization. So, the 1973 oil embargo, why did that happen? Well, the US supported Israel when it was fighting against Egypt and Syria during what is called the Yom Kippur War. And again, to be able to explain this war, I have to go back to another war, which is the 6-Day War of 1967. So the 6-Day War explains what the Yom Kippur War was, which is a war over territory, over land. So yes, after the 6-Day War, Israel was in control of a territory that was 4 times its previous size. So Israel had been fighting for only 6 days, but they managed to take a lot of land from other countries, including Egypt and Syria. I thought that a map would help you understand that, 4 times bigger than before. So yes, so Israel before the 6-Day War is in light yellow, and what Israel gained after the 6-Day War is in this color, and I'm highlighting the different areas. So yes, Egypt lost the Sinai Peninsula to Israel, as well as the Gaza Strip, and Jordan here lost the West Bank as well as East Jerusalem to Israel, and then Syria lost the Golan Heights. So you can see why Egypt and Syria were eager to fight again to get these land back, and actually Jordan joined later on during the war. Egypt and Syria wanted to get their territory back, so they launched a coordinated attack. So meaning they worked together, right? They talked about it and organized it together, and they attacked Israel together. And the name comes from the fact that they actually chose the holiest day in the Jewish calendar, and that day is called the Yom Kippur, and it's a day of atonement. And basically that means, God forgives and purifies you on that day, so that it's the day you are the closest to Him, to God. So they chose that day knowing that the army would probably be at a very low level everywhere, considering how important the day is. So the embargo was put into place when the US decided to help Israel in this fight against Egypt and Syria, and later Jordan. And the OPEC countries decided that this was not acceptable and decided to punish the US for this action. The embargo was to punish the US for helping Israel in probably a war that the OPEC countries thought was legitimate because Israel had attacked them first. But the thing is that it didn't just punish the US. It created a situation where oil prices went up by a dramatic percentage. And this led to inflation. And inflation means that also food prices increase. And again, I'll focus on the situation in African countries. So just to make sure that everybody understands inflation, well, really, it's just the fact that it's a sustained increase. So an increase for a long time, not just a couple months. And it affects the general level of prices. So all types of prices, so including goods and services. So just imagine the price of your favorite drink going up, up for at least a whole year. So what that means really is that with the same amount of money, well, you buy a smaller percentage of good or service. So in the book that I use for this flipped activities on international aid, Dambisa Moyo wrote Dead Aid. You have the full reference at the end of the video. And she mentions that Ghana, for instance, had a rather moderate inflation in 1970. It was 3%. But as you can see, 5 years later, it was 30%, and in 1977 it was 116%. So let me explain what that would mean for us nowadays. Inflation means that with the same amount of money you buy less, right? So again, if we use the inflation level of Ghana in the 1970s and look at the situation in Japan. So let's say that we focus on rice because this is the basic food in Japan. So the average price of 1 kilogram of white rice in Japan in October 2015 is 459 yen. Right? So with a 3% inflation, right, the same inflation as Ghana in 1970, it means that you would be able to buy with the same amount of money, 459 yen, you would be able to buy 0.97 kilogram. So just about the same amount, right? So not, as I said, not a terrible inflation. But now let's jump to a 30% inflation, and we realize that now you start really feeling it, right? You can only buy with the same amount of money 0.7 kilogram. And obviously, yes, if we look at 1977 in Ghana, the inflation was 116%, which means that with 459 yen, well, you couldn't buy anything because actually the price of rice, of 1 kilogram of rice, would be 991 yen. So that is how oil prices, increasing oil prices, is connected to poverty, right? Because if you only have 459 yen, then you cannot buy the rice and you will be hungry and, yes, considered poor. This situation explains why international aid in the 1970s was focusing on poverty instead of infrastructures, while they were focusing on poverty because people were hungry. And yes, hungry among other things. Again, I'm focusing on a specific aspect of the issue because I think that if we can change it, we can create powerful improvement in people's life. Food is one of the basic necessities in life. I decided to add this graph just to show you the concept of food rising, right? The food spikes. And here 2000 is considered to be the year to compare everything with. So it's 2000 is 100. So first, as you can notice, in the 1960s, the price of food commodities was double the price compared to 2000. So we see that, yes, the price of food commodities did go up in the 1970s, and then thankfully has been slowly, steadily going down. A little peak here in 1995, but then since 2000 it's going back up again. So again, that's why I chose the topic of food, because the situation is getting back to a level comparable to back in the 1960s and 70s, right? So there is potential here, as I said before, for very powerful changes if we do it right. International aid in the 1970s focused on poverty. We just saw why it did so, and I just wanted to explain to you what they were financing, right? So they were financing projects in agriculture, rural development, so the development of the countryside, housing, the quality of houses, education, health, mass vaccination programs so that some of the childhood diseases would be eradicated, would disappear. Adult literacy campaigns, so teaching adults how to read and count, and also, obviously, food for the malnourished, right? So the people who do not have enough food and end up having health issues connected to the quality of the food and the quantity of the food they're eating. Before you go on with the rest of the video, I'd like you to stop and think about these projects. Do you think they're helpful when you're trying to fight poverty? And if so, why? And if not, why not? To answer the question I just asked, for me, I believe that yes, health, education, housing, literacy, and all the others that were listed are good projects to try to reduce poverty. And yet, it didn't quite work. So if we look, right, since the 1970s, countries, poor countries, have been receiving international aid, which means it's been more than 40 years, right? And if we look at the Human Development Index, something that we studied earlier, well, it's kind of sad, but it's still very low, in my opinion, too many African countries, right? So just to remind you, the Human Development Index measures health, education, and life expectancy. So life expectancy means how long you can live. So it's another way of measuring your standards of living, right? So let's look at the map for the world. The map showing the Human Development Index of 2014 probably does not surprise you, right? Because if you look, the darker, the green color represents countries in a good situation. I have to say, I'm impressed that South America managed to get out of the bad situation it used to be in. We'll talk about it, especially next week for the 1980s. South America might be a surprise, but I guess you could imagine that African countries wouldn't be doing so well since I've been focusing on them, right? So yes, the world is still experiencing some major differences in terms of Human Development Index. And again, for me, one of the reasons, one of them, is international aid. So let me show you two maps side to side. The two maps I'm using here are the Human Development Index of 2014 that we just saw for the world. I'm just zooming onto Africa. And then the percentage of government spending really received from international aid, right? And it is 2008. I am sorry, I cannot find any more recent data. The darker colors here show a very low level of human development. So if we try to see how dependent these, let's say, two countries are on international aid, we see that they are heavily dependent on international aid, right? 126% for the Democratic Republic of Congo and 195% for the Central African Republic. Conversely, so the opposite is right too, right? A country like South Africa and Botswana, which are not doing bad at all in terms of Human Development Index. Well, if we look, South Africa, the percentage of government spending was only 2% received from international aid, and Botswana, as we saw, is 27. Right? So it seems to show that the more a country is dependent on international aid, the less human development we see. Right? Again, here is a country doing even better than South Africa because it's in this range. It's Algeria, and in 2008, only 1% of the government spending came from international aid. Same thing, Libya, 1% on a higher level, and Egypt is dependent on a level of 8% and is also in the nicer colors. So again, I am not saying that aid was targeting the wrong projects, but something did go wrong. Let me explain what it is. The problem were not the projects, but how the projects were financed. Right? So yes, they were targeting the correct sources of poverty, but not in an efficient way, because the financing was done in a way that did not encourage results. The financing was done in two ways. First, grants. Grants basically is that you get money because of your situation, and you don't have to give it back, right? It's just you're in a bad situation, here we give you money, make it better. So no explanations afterwards of how you spend the money. Then the second way is loans. So this time you do have to pay the money back, but you can borrow it very cheaply. The interest rate is very low. So people maybe don't think it's a bad idea. And on top of it, it was for much longer periods than normal commercial loans. Right? So again, they didn't have a time pressure to make it work. So it's easy to get money, and there isn't much control on how it is spent. And this is basically the perfect situation to foster corruption. Right? So corruption is someone who gets money when he or she does not deserve to be getting the money. So I will use the example of a politician. So Mobutu was the head of the Democratic Republic of Congo from 1965 to 1997. And basically, he stole $5 billion during these years, right? So he stole it from international aid. I'm not sure if there isn't a bit more money from the mines as well. That's another topic. So yes, corruption, right? Easy money and nobody really asking about how the money is spent leads to people with bad intentions to do bad things. So the financing was done in a poor way and in a way that led to another problem, which is corruption. And sadly, corruption is not helping economic growth at all. It's either slowing it down or actually stopping it altogether. So let me share with you a diagram explaining how this happens. As I said, aid leads to corruption. Corruption leads to less business, be it international business and national business. Indeed, who wants to do business if you know that the money you're making can be taken away for no reason, right? Usually corruption means that a policeman, a politician can come up to you and say, give me the money you've just made. Well, nobody wants that to happen to their business, so why would they have a business to start with? So that's where the connection between corruption and business is. On the reverse side, when a government depends on the money of businesses to function, so right, businesses usually have to pay taxes to a government, so they are paying money to the government, but this time in a legal way. Well, when a government starts depending on taxes from businesses, they become more accountable to them. So they try to be working with them instead of working against them. And also they try to make sure that businesses can grow bigger and stronger, because bigger and stronger businesses mean more taxes. That's why I say more business means less corruption. If we go back to the negative circle, meaning aid leads to corruption, corruption leads to less businesses, and less businesses means that investments, right? So putting money into the country stagnates, so they stay the same, or actually they stop. without investments, most of the time economic growth is impossible. So yes, no investments means no economic growth, and no economic growth means more poverty, which takes us back to asking for aid, which increases corruption, and we go back again. If we could break the cycle, the vicious circle here, right? If we could somehow help businesses increase, then maybe even a corrupt government would realize, wait, we're getting money from taxes, we don't even have to do bad things to get it. Maybe we could change their way of thinking and change the dynamic. And this is kind of part of my solution, the solution I was mentioning earlier, the efficient solution to helping poor countries. The idea that reducing corruption would help the situation of a country is not just something I think. Muller describes in her book that studies have shown that if you can improve a country's corruption level by just 1 point, you can actually increase the productivity by 4% in terms of GDP, which is pretty amazing, right? So if we look at a specific example, and it's Moyo's used Tanzania's example, the corruption score is 3.2, so the lower the worse, right? So 3.2. If it increased to 8.4, which is that of England, well, the GDP could increase by close to 21%. Right? So if we could change the systems, the corrupt systems, to what we see more in Western countries, so if we could change the corrupt systems in some of the African countries to what we see in the Western world, and I'm not saying it's perfect, right? England is not a 10. Well, the productivity of the country would really go up. So for me, we really ought to find ways to help people without fostering corruption. To summarize what we've seen, I would say that the 1970s aid goal was to reduce poverty. Here are the references for this video, and if I haven't been clear enough, I want to emphasize that I'm using Moyo Dambisa's book called Dead Aid for structuring this class on international aid, and here are all the other references used in this video. This is the end of the Model UN seminar, Flipped Activities for Week 6. Thank you very much.